Good morning and welcome to another episode of my intuitive reactions, the MENA and Gulf regions. There's been a dangerous spike in violence across the Palestinian West Bank since Benjamin Netanyahu's new government took over at the Knesset. The daily violence and the sheer impunity, as well as lack of answerability or even responsibility associated with this violence, are breathtaking. But hold on, this has also happened before, hasn't it? When Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid headed the government. Remember the incidents in Sheikh Jarrah in Jerusalem? Or earlier even, when a military man, Raphael Eitan, turned politician, formed his Tzomet party and labeled Palestinians as cockroaches, or even Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of the Oslo-led process, he spoke of breaking Palestinian bones. Even Golda Meir, when she was Prime Minister, claimed that Palestine and Palestinians do not exist. The difference today, I suppose, is social media that amplifies the truth of what's happening and shares it with us almost instantly. Yet the violence, unadulterated, cruel, evil, continues unabated. Look at the northern West Bank around Nablus or Jenin, in Huwara, in Za'atara, in Qasra, in Burin. The Huwara incident, described as a pogrom by some observers, also led an Israeli Labour Party member and an activist to launch an online donation campaign for the Palestinian residents in the village, whose homes, shops, and cars were damaged by the settlers. Within the first 24 hours of the initiative, over 1 million Israeli shekels, that's some 270,000 US dollars, were donated by 7,000 Israelis. I salute her courage. Bravo to her. But it's not only Nablus or Jenin. It's happening in Turmus Aya and Mughayr near Ramallah, as well as in Bethlehem, in Hebron, in Jericho, in the southern West Bank. Sites of large settlements such as Gush Etzion and Kiryat Arba. So what countermeasures are taken to stem this tide of unbridled violence? Well, we saw that a strong United Nations Security Council resolution had been drafted to condemn this violence. But what happened? US pressure diluted it to an innocuous presidential statement. The Palestinians buckled under, and the Emiratis pulled the draft bill from being debated and voted upon at the Security Council. Then we had the Aqaba politico-security powwow at the Red Sea port of Jordan. A laudable attempt, I should add, by Jordan, supported by Egypt, to give substance to a security architecture that might calm things down. But guess what? Israeli Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich, the leader of the far-right grouping in Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, said, following the Aqaba statement, there will not be a freeze on construction and development in the settlements, not even for 1 day. He added that the Israeli army will continue to act to counter terrorism without limitations. So how will this rising tension, for instance, play in the coming weeks when the Islamic holy month of Ramadan overlaps with the Jewish Passover holiday? The Americans, God bless them, still pretend to believe in the two-state solution. They also make spurious and sorry distinctions. For instance, State Department spokesperson Ned Price continues to use the same language as the Israeli narrative, calling the Palestinian attacks terrorism while referring to the deadly Israeli attacks as merely violence. But listen, Netanyahu has no intention of changing the status quo. He only wants to manage it. In fact, the enhanced violence by rabid settlers, without any tempering attempt by the Israeli security forces who protect the victimizer rather than the victim, happens in part because of the ministers in the coalition cabinet. Netanyahu cannot really control them because his future depends on them. It's that simple. And as another Israeli minister said, what happened in Jordan stays in Jordan, and threatened that the Israeli army will now go on the offensive, as if they've been so lamely on the defensive till now. Really, pull the other one, please. But this is not only about uber right-wing ministers in a Netanyahu government. It is also a way for the prime minister to divert attention from the demonstrations. I refer, of course, here not to the Palestinian popular protests, but to the relatively large-scale Israeli demonstrations against the so-called judicial reforms in favor of saving Israeli democracy. Did you see how they were dealt with yesterday? They got a momentary and tiny taste of what Palestinians feel every single day. Besides, ask a Palestinian whether the High Court subscribes to democracy or to the sense of the rule of law, and you'll get a very negative answer. This is standard Netanyahu. This is what happens under his watch. Every time he is prime minister and every time the Americans bend backward to mollycoddle him. So you might say, okay, Harry, what's the problem then? Well, it's clear, it's obvious, isn't it? It's the occupation. Yes, I agree. The Palestinians are divided. Gaza from Ramallah, and even within Gaza and Ramallah, between different members or factions or personalities. But that is a matter for Palestinians, not a benchmark for the occupying power that, frankly, doesn't give a hoot to the Geneva Conventions and thinks it can break the will of a whole people. Please, don't ask the arsonist to join the fire brigade. So there is always the perennial question: will the EU wake up and act politically besides helping financially, which it does? Well, why not recognize the state of Palestine? Why not stop importing goods from settlements? Why not understand the philosophy of the BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, rather than have a Pavlovian nugatory reaction to it? Also, will America change its attitude? For that matter, and closer to home, will the Arab countries, Abraham-friendly or Abraham-unfriendly, with a few notable exceptions, I must add, will they act too? What about the two-sidesism of some of our Western media that love to sit on the fence when they report from Palestine with their on the one hand and on the other hand stories. Sadly, really sadly, none of this will happen unless the violence in Palestinian cities, towns, and villages becomes so alarming that these stakeholders, the EU, America, Arab countries, the media, feel the need to act so as to protect their own interests and avoid any more firestorms in their own backyards. You know, during the Oslo years, I often spoke of peace. I wrote many articles on peace as the consequential tool of justice, as being the sole option. And today, I must admit that there are still prophets of peace on both sides, but their numbers are diminishing rapidly as the anger levels, the frustration levels, the pent-up feelings go up amongst disempowered and downtrodden Palestinian men and women. One of them, incidentally, happens to be a friend, Jonathan Kutab, a lawyer colleague and author of a most challenging book, really challenging book. Look him up and check his book. But now, I too am unsure whether peace can be achieved, just as I too disbelieve in the two-state solution, although I also truly dread the alternatives. And when someone like me, who was an optimist, gradually drifted into pessimism and is now skirting on the edge of pessimism, for me, for whom peace and non-violence are immutable or sacrosanct principles, I worry about my own conversion. But more importantly, I worry about a whole country that is being pilloried, plundered, and pillaged without mercy, without due process, and without recourse. When I upload this episode on my YouTube channel later today and share it with you, I'll title it A Plaintive Cry for Peace with an exclamation mark. A plaintive and mournful cry indeed. But will you listen to it? Or will you simply wear your political mufflers? What will you do? Will you stand up or will you chicken out